Hey there, welcome back. I have another terrifying tale to tell you today about some neighbors from hell. The housing market was crazy, but we finally found a place in our budget that had some charm. It was built in the 1800s, had a big yard, and was located on a block that looked like it hadn't changed much in 50 years. It was addressed to us in embossed red ink. It read, "You're invited to the annual Halloween gathering hosted by Harold Haver." A witch's cauldron bubbled ominously over a nearby grill. As we stepped further into the house, I realized that all the walls were lined with portraits of pale, gaunt faces that seemed to watch our every move. Some of the paintings were old and some were clearly new, but all of them seemed vaguely unsettling. "Well, hello, dears," he said in a raspy voice. "Finally, we're ready for some fresh faces." He threw back his head and laughed, but the sound came out more like a snarl. I forced myself to smile back. "Sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She was standing in her yard, staring toward the Havers house. The yard was empty, the driveway was empty, the house was empty. There was not even a foundation or a pile of rubble. The only evidence that it had ever stood there was a single jack-o'-lantern filled with stale water and a few dead leaves. And on our kitchen floor, still stuck to our fridge, was the invitation. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. I asked, "Why are you talking riddles?" She ignored me. I had no idea they'd do something like this. I had no idea. "What are you talking about? You need to come see this?" she said. "We just thought we'd drop by and say hi. You know, since we're new in town and it's Halloween and all. Maybe it was a dream, maybe it wasn't. But if you ever get an invitation to a party that starts at midnight, don't go." The man's smile widened, revealing far too many teeth. "And if you're looking for more spooky season entertainment, we actually have a brand new episode of our show premiering this Wednesday. So I'm going to link that down below for you guys to watch. Thanks again for everything, and we'll see you all next week for more scary stories." "Ah, yes, of course," he said. "Well, how could we possibly let such an opportunity pass us by?" I could feel my wife's hand tightening in mine. Neither of us had expected this. The porch light flickered as if the bulb was loose in its socket. An assortment of guests were gathered here, each seemingly deep in conversation. At first we couldn't make out their features, but as our eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, we began to notice details. Each guest had unnaturally white skin, long, sharp teeth, and shockingly black eyes. It was time to go. Several men and women wore rings on their fingers that glinted in the candlelight. And as we walked up the stairs to the front door, I noticed that the brass knocker took the shape of a human skull. My wife knocked hesitantly, and a woman dressed like a zombie opened the door. Another guest followed soon after, and then another, and then another. The disappearance continued until only 5 of us remained in the room. My wife and I exchanged uneasy glances. I excused us and we slipped out the front door. She stepped aside to let us in and then disappeared into the darkness. There was one house that seemed to stand out though. Rain lashed against my face and the trees swayed violently. Suddenly the wind shifted and the sound of screams pierced the night. I pulled my wife close. "It was probably just a branch," I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as her. The card implied that costumes were required and mentioned that the party would start promptly at midnight. I thought it was quirky, and my wife thought it was fun and maybe a little weird, but she agreed that we should go. After all, we wanted to make a good first impression on our new neighbors. Quaint, quiet, lots of charm. No lights ever came on at night, and no one ever came outside during the day. It sat at the end of the block, always had its windows covered with boards, and the front door was locked with a heavy chain. The house seemed creepy, but our house was directly across the street, so we couldn't avoid it. All the way from North Carolina is our next story writer. Let's hear it. We had just moved to a new town, and my 2 kids were going to be trick or treating for the first time. The week before Halloween, we started meeting our neighbors. Mrs. Henderson from next door baked us cookies. Mr. Williams stopped by to see what kind of beer we had in our cooler, and little Billy down the street asked if we had any candy corn. But the family across the street remained a mystery. We waved to an older gentleman that we assumed must have been the owner. and he waved back without even acknowledging his face. All the other neighbors seemed to know him, and they all called him Harold Haver. Not abandoned, not boarded up, but completely gone. Then, a few days later, we got a card in the mail. When we arrived at the Haver's house, it seemed bigger than I remembered. The path was lined with jack-o'-lanterns and ghosts. I honestly don't know. Inside, the entry was dominated by a large mirror that reflected nothing except dust motes dancing in the candlelight. We entered a cavernous room filled with velvet chairs and candelabras. As we stood awkwardly in the doorway, one of the men turned to us and smiled. Around one of the guests excused himself and disappeared through a doorway at the end of the hall. As we hurried home, the sky grew dark and the wind began to howl. In the morning, we got a call from Mrs. Henderson. When we arrived, Haver's house was gone. So what really happened to our neighbors? Wow. Well, thanks so much for listening and also for all the support. You guys have been absolutely amazing.